Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we're going to continue with our lesson on ICT application, where we're going to cover on measurement application and microprocessor in control application. So when we are talking about measurement application, it is actually the application sensor are used to measure physical quantities such as temperature, pressure, and light intensity. So here, for the measurement application, how we use ICT to measure a physical quantity. For example, you want to measure the temperature. Yes, you can actually measure the temperature using thermometer, but for the ICT, we can actually measure the temperature automatically, as well as the pressure and light intensity. And we're going to measure this particular physical quantities. We're going to use sensor. Sensor is actually an input devices which take measurements and input the values into the computer. For example, thermometer. Thermometer has a sensor. So those thermometer will measure the temperature, and automatically the sensor will input. They will enter the value into the computer. There is a difference between monitoring and controlling on application using a computer and sensor. Sensor used to send data to a computer where the data is processed, and then monitoring is the computer simply reviews the data from sensor by comparing it to data stored in memory and update its fall. And another one is control application. So actually the computer gain reviews the data from the sensor by comparing it to data stored in the memory. So here what it means that, let's say for example, we are going to talk about the temperature in the greenhouse. As you know, that greenhouse, we're talking about the temperature. The temperature must be maintained. So in order to maintain the temperature, the sensor will check the temperature first, the temperature inside the greenhouse, and then after that the sensor will send the data to the computer, and then the monitor, it will be monitored, meaning it compare the temperature. If the temperature is too high, then it compare with the previous temperature. Let's say for example, supposed to be the temperature is 25 degree. Let's say for example, the sensor send a temperature of 26 degree, then it monitor first by comparing it to data, and then after that it update its file. And then after that, the control application, the control application is where after they compare, they use various types of technique to reduce the temperature. And there are actually different types of sensor. The first one is temperature sensor. It is used to measure for used for measurements during experiment and for controlling heating or cooling system. And light is actually another sensor which is used to measure the intensity of light, whether you want to turn it on or you want to turn it off automatically. You don't have to manually turn on and turn off. Another one is sound sensor. Sound is actually to measure the loudness of sound and used in noise disputes. And the next one is pressure sensor. It is used to measure the tap of liquid in a container and also measure the pressure on a pad when a person stands on it. And humidity is to measure the moisture in soil or air, for example in a greenhouse or inside the museum. For example, in the museum they need to maintain the humidity sometimes for the art gallery. And then another one is passive infrared, or known as PIR. It is used to detect movement and used in burglar alarm and to turn lights on and off automatically. So let's say for example there is a robber inside the house, automatically this PIR will detect their movement and switch on the alarm. And analog and digital data, this is actually important, analog and digital data, because when we are talking about measurement, as I mentioned to you before, that you measure using the sensor, it is an analog. The data is actually an analog. So for example, length, weight are measured by an analog device which represent physical measurement. And then to enable the data to be processed by the computer, they need analog digital converter, which is actually inside the computer itself, where once they receive the data from the sensor will send the analog data to the computer before the computer accept the data. It will convert first the data from analog to digital. It is because the computer will only be able to accept the digital data, and reading from sensors are taken automatically and used immediately for setting off alert, and stored for a later processing to produce graph, or for auto control where they are used to turn devices on and off. So when we are talking about monitoring is actually at first after the sensor check the temperature, the sensor check the data, and then it will automatically taken, and then after that immediately they set that they actually they actually immediately take for setting off alarm, and it is going to be stored in the computer. It is to monitor. Let's say, for example, when we are talking about the temperature, every day the sensor is going to check the temperature of that particular environment, and is to be saved in the computer. Then this monitoring application will then produce the graph on the pattern of the temperature. Let's say, for example, monitoring a patient vital signs in a computer. At first, sensor, which is an input device, will read key vital sign, for example, the pulse and the temperature of the patient, and then after that, the data will be sent by the sensor and converted to digital by using analog digital converter, so that the computer will enable to accept the data, and then the computer will compare the data from the sensor with values stores in its memory, and then the result output on a screen. An alarm is activated if any of the data is outside acceptable parameter. So what it means that, let's say, for example, the patient rather than the nurse check the temperature every day, the sensor will just check the temperature of the patient and then automatically be converted to digital, so that it will save into the computer, and then the computer will automatically compare the data. That is actually under monitoring. They compare the data, for example, from the previous day to the current day, and then after that the result will be shown on the screen as an output, and then an alarm is activated. Let's say, for example, if the temperature is too high, so an alarm will be activated to inform the nurse or to inform the doctor that there is something wrong with the patient. Okay, now microprocessor in control application. Data from sensor can be input into the microprocessor, which then determines whether to turn output devices on or off by comparing the value of the data with a preset value. Preset value is actually the value which already set by the computer. Let's say, for example, supposed to be in that particular, let's say, for example, we're talking about greenhouse. Supposed to be in the greenhouse, the temperature is 25, then the preset value is going to be 25. It is beyond, above, or below the preset value, then they're going to do something. So here are the steps taken. A sensor measures the physical quantities, which are temperature, light, and etc., and input the reading into the microprocessor, and then the processor compare the input value with the preset value. So the microprocessor then sends signal to an output devices to turn it on or to turn it off, and the process above is continuous. So it means that since we are talking about the control, they have the preset value. Let's say, for example, in the greenhouse supposed to be 25 degrees Celsius, but then the temperature is, let's say, for example, 26 degrees, which is actually too high for the preset value. So what they do, it's either be they switch off, they open the window or they close the window, but they need to compare the preset value first. Okay, this is an example of the greenhouse. 5 different sensors needed to control greenhouse. This is usually the sensors which are needed for the greenhouse: humidity, moisture, temperature, pH, and light sensor. In the humidity sensor, it sends a signal to an ADC, is analog digital data converter, which then send a digital signal to the computer, and then it compare the input with stored value and then decide what action to be taken. Let's say, for example, meaning that stored value is the preset value. Let's say, for example, if humidity is too high, the computer send a signal to digital analog converter DAC to operate the motor to open windows, thus reducing the humidity. So that is actually what control means. They check using humidity sensor on what is actually the humidity of the greenhouse. If it is too high, then they send the they open the window. If it is too low, then they close the window. It is to maintain the humidity inside the greenhouse. Okay, this is actually an example of the greenhouse. What it means that at first all the sensor will be converted from analog to digital converter, and then it's saved to the computer, and then the computer will compare the preset value according to the sensor. And then if there is something that they need to do to maintain, then the computer will send the data. They convert first the data to digital, which is from the computer, and then to analog, which is the physical quantity. So the device under computer control. So let's say, for example, here, moisture. There will be a moisture signal. If it is too high, then they send a signal. The computer will send a signal to switch on heater to dry. Or if it is too low, send signal to open valve to add water. So it means that after the sensor check the moisture, then they have the preset value, then they check if the moisture is too high, then they will send the signal using DAC to switch on the heater to dry. Or if it is too low, they will send the signal from the computer to open valve to add water to add on the moisture. So same as the rest. Okay, so that's all for today. For when we're talking about advantages and the disadvantages, you can just read this on your own, try to understand. And once you complete watching this video, I want you to continue doing your classwork, which will be provided the link through the WhatsApp. Okay, thank you very much.